Hello, friends, and welcome. Welcome to Stamp Chat. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome as you come into tonight's Stamp Chat. We'll just give you a few moments for all of our attendees. We know we've got a lot of registered folks joining us tonight. As you file in the event that you are not an APS member, well, we have a great deal going on right now. You can get, 15 months for the cost of 12 months using the code VSS 2020, and that offer is good until next Friday, September 11th. Membership has its privileges. Welcome, everyone. And I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, welcome to Stamp Chat, everyone. My name is Heidi Rhodes. We thank you for joining us as we pay tribute to the 75th anniversary of VJ Day, or Victory Over Japan Day. Today on Stamp Chat, we welcome Mr. Jeff Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro has been a stamp collector since age 10. He is an exhibitor, philatelic judge, and writer. Jeff has been an APS member for 36 years and is currently a vice president of the APS. Additionally, he serves as Vice President of the United States Stamp Society and as a coordinator of the Prexy Era Research Committee. Today's Stamp Chat is sponsored by the American Philatelic Research Library. If you're an APS member, you're able to borrow materials from the library or request scans, photocopies, or research for all your philatelic questions. To find out more about the library, visit our webpage at stamplibrary.org and explore all the services we provide to both members and non-members. Now, friends, before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to take care of. Today's session is a webinar, and as such, all audio and video of attendees will be muted and turned off respectively throughout the presentation. Please feel free to use the chat box to engage with other attendees and use the Q&A box for your questions to Mr. Shapiro. This session is being recorded and will be made available on the APS YouTube channel soon. And with that, we now present the Prexies Go to War. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro.
Heidi's being so formal. Please call me Jeff. One thing I would ask, if you have any questions, please save them to the end of the seminar, and I will try to answer as many as I can. And if I don't know, I'll mumble. All right, maybe some introduction is needed. What the hell is a Prexy? We are honoring dead presidents of the United States. In 1938, President Roosevelt had an idea that a new domestic series should be created honoring all our deceased presidents, because there's a law that says people living cannot be on stamps. And so in 1938, the 1938 presidential series was introduced. And for those of you who like trivia contests, the presidential series is great because you can tell the president's number by its denomination. For instance, we've got Washington, 1 cent stamp. He was the first president. Adams, the second president, is on the 2 cent stamp, and on and on and on. Lincoln, the 16th president, is on the 16-cent stamp. The only problem was a guy by the name of Cleveland messed things up by being the 22 and 24th president. So after the 22-cent stamp, you're on your own. I've been collecting this Prexy series for about 25 years, and I joined a small group of people who collect this series. We call ourselves postal historians or hysteria, because not only the stamp, we look at covers that show history, rates, and roots is the easy way of looking at it. But as you'll see by this presentation, we go way beyond what's the minimal thoughts about postal history. Okay, I'll answer any questions that you have about the presidential series. Oh, by the way, one reason I love this series is billions of these stamps were printed, and they were used from 1938 until the mid 1950s. So the stamps have minimal value, but the fun is finding great covers with interesting usages, and I hope the next 15 covers that we show will be able to show you how wonderful this series can be. Okay, why don't we go on to the next slide, which I believe is, yes, is the cover that was on the first slide. As I mentioned, this is a 10-cent Prexy, worth, I think in the Scott catalog, about 25 cents a piece, but you can find them in boxes of stamps for a penny or 2 cents. Unfortunately, covers like these cannot be found in boxes unless you're very lucky, and I'll be showing you some covers that I have found in what we call junk box, but this wasn't. This is a good way to start a presentation on World War II. For those of you that know your history, the Germans invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and they entered through the Cisco region of Czechoslovakia. And here is a cover that was mailed, a commercial cover that was mailed on August 29th to that region. By the time it reached Europe, or this could have been stopped in Bermuda, the Brits had already went to war with the Germans, and this cover was not delivered. But here's a cover that could have been there at the beginning of the war if the Brits had let it in. Okay, next. All right, here again, you have to know a little bit about history, because when I saw this on eBay, it was interesting because here is a copy of the Frankfurt, Germany newspaper. And the editors of the Frankfurt paper saw what an American paper had done by creating smaller versions for Americans traveling in Europe. And what the Frankfurt people decided to do was create a 5-page small version of the Frankfurt paper to keep Germans in North America just knowing what was going on in Germany. And this is a spring 1940 issue of the newspaper, sent in bulk to the United States, where a contractor in New York City would send issues of this newspaper to subscribers around the country. And a 2-cent stamp was used, and it's called the second class transit rate. Very fancy, but all that means is it's a newspaper or other periodical that was resent, not by the publisher, but by someone else. So again, that's not unusual until I did a little investigation. And a lot of that investigation came from the APRL. There's a little star for the APRL, but also Google. Thank God for Google in the middle of the night when I can't sleep. There's a lot of good information to be found there. And what I found was that the Brits were taking off all the mail on transatlantic planes while these planes stopped to be refueled in Bermuda or the Bahamas, depending on the season. And in this case, when the Brits who were at war with Germany saw the Frankfurt newspaper, they immediately took the paper off the plane, and most never made it beyond that. But I'm told I've got one of 3 that made it through. As you can see, the second class transient, there's an address of Park Avenue, New York City, where this newspaper was delivered. Okay, next. All right, here is 2 10-cent Prexies. I promise you there'll be other stamps beside Prexies, but right now we are in the middle of 10-cent Prexy land. When I first started collecting postal history, a friend who collects stamps couldn't understand why we kept the envelope and stuff in the envelope, and just, it's easier to collect the stamps. And I said, well, I don't like easy. So he said, well, I guess the reason you do it is you like to read dead people's mail. And I guess that's the best idea I've heard about what postal history is all about. But here is a letter from a sailor sent on December 8th, 1941 from Honolulu. He was on the USS Whitney, who was at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked. The Whitney exchange didn't get much damage and was able to pull away. But it's reading the letter, and I will just quote, the sailor told his mother, quote, "I'm safe and sound. Mail is being censored, so I can't say any more. Say a prayer for me." I did a little Googling, and I'm sorry to say that the sailor did not make it through the war. Okay, next. Again, more 10-cent Prexies. Here are 6 10-cent Prexies paying 2 times the half-ounce 30-cent rate to mail across the Atlantic. It's a very nice example of mail that never made it. As you can see, return to sender, services suspended, machine cancel, and there's a nice tape, sensor tape, but this also has a story to it. This letter was from a lawyer who was able to obtain an exit visa from the Cuban government so that the 2 women, Jewish women, that this letter was sent to could get out of Berlin and go on to Lisbon. Unfortunately, the letter never got there, so the visa never got there, and history shows that the 2 women were sent to a concentration camp by January and were killed. Again, this was sent December 1st, 1941, and therefore by the time it was ready to be delivered in Europe, it was arrested. So again, some sad news about this war. Next. Okay, two covers. Let me talk about the bottom cover first. These 2 covers have to do with POW camps. The one at the bottom has an 18-cent Prexy on it, grant, and was sent to Bismarck, North Dakota, Fort Abraham Lincoln. And this is what we call a secret address because box 300 never said anything about Fort Abraham Lincoln, but was where all the mail for the fort was sent, and the fort became a POW camp for, in the beginning, merchant marines caught on the West Coast. And as you can see, this cover is mailed March 17th, 1942. So this is very early in the war. So once America declared war against the Axis, any Axis ship all the members on the ship were arrested and sent to prisoner of war camps. And for those of you interested in what the stamps mean, 6 cent was airmail, and the 18-cent stamp paid for registration. Okay, the cover at the top with a very, let's go back. Go back. Yes, the cover at the top, again with a very, very common 3-cent Jefferson Prexy, was sent from Honolulu, Hawaii to a detention camp at Sand Island. unfortunately, this cover is overpaid by 1 cent because Sand Island was part of the Honolulu post office system, and therefore it was entitled to a 2 cent rate. And for those of you interested, Sand Island was, yes, a detention camp, but for really bad guys, people that were, according to the government, sworn against the United States, active Nazi sympathizers, and the like. Sand Island only lasted for a couple years, and then these detainees were sent to other camps on the mainland. Sand Island, very few of these covers exist because only 24 people lived at Sand Island at any one time. All right, next. All right, and here's another couple covers showing a very sad time for America. In February 1942, FDR, bowing to political pressure, authorized the forced relocation and incarceration of people of Japanese ancestry who lived on the West Coast. It's interesting to note that there were many Japanese living on Hawaii, and they were never affected by this. But there were a number of people on the Pacific West Coast who were forced to relocate to internment camps in very desolated areas in the West. The first one is to a resident of the Topaz, Utah internment camp. And I believe Topaz got so large that it became one of the largest communities in Utah. And the 3 cent stamp paid so this letter could be sent to another internee in another camp in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. Okay, the bottom one has a 1.5 cent Martha Washington stamp on it. And Martha, while not a president, kept at least one president's wooden teeth happy, so she got a stamp. She paid for the 3rd class rate, which is basically, we call it a rate that you sent cards with, because it was sent unsealed and you couldn't write. And here is I guess an Easter card. Unfortunately, there was no card in the envelope, sent from one resident of the Hunt, Idaho camp to another resident of the Hunt, Idaho internment camp. Since there was no post office within the camp, this cover had to go to the local post office, which was about 20 miles away in Hunt. And all that happened with a 1.5 cent stamp. Okay. Oh, by the way, that's the Minidoka transit camp. All right, here's another bit of sad news. Here's a 3 cent Prexy paying their 1st class mail rate, and it went from Kansas City to Washington to the commander Rents of the USS Houston that was sunk by the Japanese March 1st, 2 weeks after this letter was mailed. The government, the Navy, was not having very good luck with the war, and so people decided just to hold this cover and then return it. As you can see, mail service suspended, because it wasn't officially mentioned to the general public that the Houston was sunk by the Japanese. It's interesting to note that those of you that know about your movies and the bridge on the River Kwai, sailors on the River Kwai that survived the sinking were sent to a POW camp, and these people were the ones that actually built the railroad bridge on the River Kwai. So it's a real story, and here's a real piece of history, all with a 3-cent stamp on it. Okay. I hope we can get happier here, but here's another casualty of war. Here's a 3-cent and a 5-cent Prexy paying 8 cents, which is double weight for surface mail. This was sent to the owners of the SS Penetrandos. Please, I'm embarrassed by how I can't pronounce some of these names, but the Furnace Company owned the ship, and this was mailed to the captain. And again, long, sad story is this letter was mailed on the 26th of January in 1940, but returned because on January 16th, this freighter was hit by a German U-boat torpedo, the U-44, west of Brest, France, and sank in 3 minutes with the loss of all 31 on board. So again, a little bit of history. And while some judges like to see perfect copies, I don't mind the wrinkles from this letter because it's a nice piece of history. Next. Okay, here is a lot of 5-cent stamps. At first, when I first saw it, I figured, it's philatelic, because sometimes philatelic envelopes are made by stamp collectors for stamp collectors. But when I did some research on this, it's not, I don't believe it's philatelic. Those who, some in the audience might think so, but let me tell you, 14 5-cent Prexies paid the 70-cent per half-ounce trans-Pacific airmail rate to mail this government cover over the Pacific by way of West Coast, Honolulu, Hong Kong, India, and into Iraq. When you look at it, it's interesting that it's not censored. But what's also interesting, by looking at the auxiliary marks, the ones in the back, you can see that there was a 4-week delay in delivering this cover. And a little bit of research shows that the fundamentalist group called started the Ali Rashid Rebellion. These were fundamentalists who started out saying that they really wanted British influence out of Iraq. But on closer look, these were Nazi sympathizers who wanted to get Germany into the oil that Iraq possessed. The rebellion lasted about 4 weeks, and once the rebellion was put down, this letter was delivered. So again, serendipity, but again, a little bit of knowledge. You can look at the auxiliary marks and find out that you've got a really nice piece of history. Okay? Okay, here I'm showing you cutting edge technology in 1945. A lot of World War II collectors are familiar with these records. There are 78 recordings. Any of you young in the room will tell you about what records were later, but a lot of these records were made available to the people on trains, soldiers on trains going across country. They would stop where volunteers would give the soldiers coffee and donuts and good wishes, but also some of the companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola would have machines ready, and they would ask the soldiers if they wanted their records of their voices made to send to their families to tell them they were okay. And there are thousands and thousands of these records available. But here is a very special record created by a lady in California who had a short wave radio, and she had a hobby of recording Tokyo broadcasts because every once in a while people like Tokyo Rose would make an announcement of United States pilots that were downed and sent to Japan. And what this lady had an idea that she would record the broadcasts, and when certain names of the pilots were heard, she would try to get the family's name and send them the recording so that the families would know that their pilots were okay. So here is one of the first recordings that I've ever seen of this nice hobby that this lady had. Next. Okay. I think a lot of us in high school remember the medieval tale of the missionaries. And here is two letters with a 20th century missionary tale, with a sad then happy ending. The first one, dated November 7th, 1941, with a 5-cent Madison Prexy, which paid the international surface rate, was sent to a missionary in Japanese-occupied China. While en route, war was declared and mail service was suspended to China. And unbeknownst to the writer, missionary Alice Huggins had been arrested by Japanese authorities as a spy. And she went off to a prisoner of war camp. And just by serendipity, about 18 months later, I found the second cover addressed to this Alice Huggins. And Miss Huggins was lucky enough to be on the Grisp's home, which was a ship that was rented by the Swedes to send up POWs. And in this case, Miss Huggins was repatriated to some Japanese prisoners in, of all places, Madagascar. So again, that's a missionary's tale. Kind of nice. Next. All right, we go from missionaries to sailors. This is from a 1940 family correspondence between an E.M. Crouch, who was serving on the USS Edsel and was stationed in Manila. And his wife in California sent a letter to them, a very nice letter. Those of you that know your first day covers, this is an illustrated cover made by the Crosby with a picture of the SS Washington, which has nothing to do with the story, but it's still a nice cover. The 10 5-cent Prexies paid for the 50-cent half-ounce rate to the Philippines, where Lieutenant Commander Crouch was stationed with the Edsel. Edsel was transferred in early 1942, luckily for him, because 2 weeks later, the Edsel was sunk by Japanese cruisers, and many of the crew drowned. Moving on to see how long Lieutenant Crouch's luck would last, records indicate that the commander, that Mr. Crouch was made commander and was on the USS Indianapolis 3.5 months later in July 1945. And after delivering vital parts of the first atomic bomb to the Air Force Base in Tinian, this ship with Commander Crouch on it was sunk. The parts, by the way, were used to make what was coded as Little Boy, and this atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August 8, 1945. So that's, I wish we had a better ending for this sailor, but it's part of the story. Next, please. Next, there we go. When I first saw this cover, the dealer apologized to me and said, you know, this is a really destroyed cover. You know, I'll give you a discount. And I took a look at it and I said, no discount is necessary. And while it's not in perfect condition, it was opened on 3 sides so the sensors could find out what was inside. Because as you can see, there were stripes in color. And that was indication that there were possible secret messages being sent, and chemicals like lemon juice, vinegar, and yes, urine were used to bring out visible messages. And again, if the stripes weren't good enough for me, this is one of the few examples of the United States using chemical censorship. It was mostly the Germans and the Brits using it. So again, watch out for dirty old covers. Sometimes they have some history to them. Next. Okay, because I have no life and have been doing research on some of this undercover stuff, when I saw this, I grabbed it immediately. And I'm happy to say I found this at my favorite stamp show, Philatelic Show, Boxborough, Massachusetts. It doesn't look like much. It's 2 Martha Washington 1.5-cent stamps, paying the 3-cent domestic rate, and it was going to South Brooklyn, New York. And some of us know that's the Brooklyn Navy Yard. But the important part of this cover is the receiving station mark, which I recognized as undercover address. And then when I turned it over, it was very unusual to find a Russian Cinderella stamp franked on the envelope. So the enclosed Christmas card would have been enough, but a little bit of Google help let me know that this Lieutenant Lufchi was a Navy armed guard on one of the 8 American and Panamanian vessels that were sailing in convoy to Murmansk. And in the middle of the Atlantic, the convoy received urgent messages that the Germans had found out their mission and they had U-boats looking for the convoy. So 4 of the ships got away from the convoy and went directly north to above the Arctic Circle. And these 4 ships were later known in a couple of books that were written on this story as the Lost Convoy. And they spent, I believe, 6 weeks if not more, in the ice pack north of Siberia, waiting for the U-boat to forget about this convoy. So again, nice, very nice undercover address with 2 relatively cheap Prexy stamps. Okay.
Well, that's the end of your presentation, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you so much for this fascinating, informative presentation. Friends, if you have a question for our presenter, feel free to enter it in the Q&A box, please. And we'll begin by reading questions that have been already submitted. So let's get started. Our first question for you, Mr. Shapiro, is on the rebellion cover to Baghdad, Iraq, is the double triangle hand stamp an Iraqi censor mark?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that was easy. Next question is, why call them Prexy instead of Prezi?
Prexy sounds more presidential. Prezi sounds like a name a coin collector would use. No, I don't know why Prexy was chosen. One of my Prexy exhibits was I lost medal level because the German judge thought I was making fun of famous American heroes who decided to become president. And I'm innocent. I think the Prexy name comes from the early 40s, where I believe a stamp writer gave the name to the presidential series.
Well, it sounds like people are agreeing with you here, Mr. Shapiro, in the chat box that Prexy sounds great.
Well, to quote a Prexy person, Prexy's rock.
Prexy's rock. And for any of our friends that are on the call or who will be watching this on APS YouTube, just in case you have, this has piqued your interest, which I'm sure it has in Prexies, if you would like to receive a newsletter from the Prexy era, the Prexy era newsletter, please send an email, and I'll write my email in the chat box at heidi@stamps.org. You can send an email to me at heidi@stamps.org, and we will connect you over to the Prexy era folks, and you will be able to sign up for their newsletter.
This is a cheap way of getting you interested in the Prexy era study group. I'll send you one newsletter. If you're interested, we'll give you information on joining our group.
Excellent. And we have another question, sir. Here we are. The Sailor's Tale cover appears to be a cached cover by Walter Crosby. Have you ever been able to verify this?
Yes, there is a reference on Crosby caches, and that's in the book as one of his caches.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, friends, please, Mr. Shapiro, take a moment and review the chat box for all of the accolades from our live attendees that they're sharing with you in the chat box. We want to thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for coming on to Stamp Chat. We thank you for your attendance, friends, and ask that you join us in thanking Mr. Shapiro. Today's Stamp Chat was sponsored by the American Philatelic Research Library. APS members can borrow materials and request philatelic research support. Visit stamplibrary.org to learn more about the APRL. You can also subscribe to the Philatelic Literature Review, the library's quarterly journal. Your subscription helps fund the library and all of the services we provide our patrons. Have a favorite philatelic book and want to make a contribution that will support the APRL and a lasting legacy? Learn about the APRL's Adopt a Book by visiting stamps.org/adopt-a-book. For more Stamp Chats, visit and subscribe to the APS YouTube channel, where you can find over 60 presentations. Use the comments box below to keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next Stamp Chat. Until then, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and of course on stamps.org. Collect, connect, APS, social since 1886. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Bye-bye, everyone. There's a lot of clicking around here.